After exactly 1 year of waiting, we finally got some more news regarding Pokemon Legends ZA. We saw a ton of amazing things, including the new starters and a first look on what Mega Evolution looks like in this game. And while I know that they haven't announced any yet, I'm coping a little that they're absolutely going to add some new ones at some point. I mean, come on, they have to, right? But regardless, I decided to compile a list of 10 Pokemon I personally would love to see get one whenever the time comes. Also, a quick heads up, I already made a video similar to this one, so if I talked about a Pokemon in that video, I won't be bringing it up here. If you want to check it out, I'll link it probably in the description, but it's also a little bit outdated. Just please don't go after my neck if I don't bring up Flygon in this video. I mainly wanted to focus on the underdogs, and if anything, I'm happy with anything getting a Mega Evolution as long as it isn't Mega Charizard Z. But I do want to start with the most generic Pokemon on the list. It's always been crazy to me that only one Kalos Pokemon got access to the gimmick that literally defines their region. And while there are a ton of cool Gen 6 Pokemon I'd love to see Mega Evolve, including more that I'll talk about later, I'm going to start with a very basic choice in Talonflame. It's the native bird of Kalos and a very well-liked Pokemon among the fanbase, so there's a lot of good reasoning behind why it should get one. At some point, it used to be one of the best Pokemon in the game thanks to its ability Gale Wings, giving priority to all of the flying type attacks it could use. But ever since the nerf it received, Talonflame has taken a bit of a back seat. It does have its niche here and there thanks to having great utility, but for the most part, he's kinda just been a chill guy. However, it's been 3 whole generations since then. Even if it doesn't end up being great in battle or whatever, it would still just be nice as a tribute to one of the more popular Pokemon from Gen 6. It's also pretty interesting to note that only one native bird Pokemon actually has a Mega Evolution, and that of course is Pidgeot, which, not to be a hater, is very unsurprising. But speaking of Gen 1 pampering, I do have a singular Kanto Pokemon on this list. One that, although Kanto Pokemon usually get a ton of attention, this one just always ends up with the shortest end of the stick, at least in my opinion, and that award goes to Golem. Now, I don't know if it's just me, but I always classify these specific 4 Pokemon into the same group, and it's that group of powerful stage 2 Pokemon that you could only evolve through trading. And between these 4 Pokemon, I do think that Golem gets the least amount of love. Gengar and Alakazam already got Mega Evolutions, and Machamp in Gen 8 got a Gigantamax form, albeit a really terrible one. I'm not gonna lie, I was very close to giving this spot to Machamp anyways because I don't think there's a single person in the world who actually cares about G-Max Machamp. But none of that compares to this putrid, just ugly Alolan form that Golem received. Okay, yeah, I guess it could be worse, but compared to something like Alolan Ninetales, there was almost no reason to look at Alolan Golem twice. The best part about it was sadly just watching it blow up. I'll admit, Galvanized Explosion was pretty funny, but that's no way to live. Golem deserves a much better legacy than this, and I think a new Mega Evolution is exactly what it would need for people to start respecting it a little bit more. Moving forward 1 generation, I must say that with how little Pokemon are in Gen 2, they got a ton of pretty cool Megas. A lot of fan favorites were picked, and let's be honest, Ampharos has the coolest Mega, you cannot convince me otherwise. Obviously, they didn't go with every great Pokemon from Gen 2, so if they decide to go with one more Pokemon, we have a ton of pretty cool options here. Personally, I would be happy with anything as long as it's not Blissey. That whole line could leave for all I care. But if I had to choose one, I think I would go with Crobat. I've always been pretty fond of Crobat, and I would use it as my flying type in a lot of games if I liked it more than the regional bird. Crobat has always been really strong in my opinion, but as with a lot of older Pokemon nowadays, it got power crept really hard. The biggest thing it always had going for it was its speed, which at 130 is still really good. But nowadays, we're just getting more and more really fast Pokemon that provide much more to the table, with some of them even being faster than Crobat. It's also a shame that the Crobat line is one of the remaining Pokemon that isn't in Scarlet and Violet even after both DLCs. So what better way to make your return than having a sick and awesome new Mega Evolution? Now there's just 1 generation that I can't tell if Game Freak respects, and that is Gen 5. Not only did they presumably skip Black and White when it comes to new games, but in X and Y, Gen 5 only received a singular Mega Evolution, and it just happens to be the worst one. There are a lot of great choices for Gen 5, and I made this exact same speech before when I talked about Chandelure. But today, I'd like to draw your attention towards Crocodile. Crocodile is just one of those Pokemon that is super hard to dislike in my opinion. It just looks really cool, and it has the sick type combination of ground and dark. But as time went on, this thing kinda just faded away. It never really had anything going for it to really be on people's radar. I mean, sure, it looked cool, but so did a lot of Pokemon, especially from Gen 5. And while it was pretty good in battle, it also came around right before the release of Fairy type Pokemon. So its time got cut short since a lot of Dark type Pokemon Pokemon suffered really badly during that era. Now, it also had the great fortune of being Ash's ace in the Black and White anime, but somebody had to tell me this because I just didn't pay attention to that series. And I'm aware that a lot of people think of it as the worst Pokemon anime out there. I just think that Crocodile was a really cool Pokemon with a lot of unfortunate circumstances around it. And personally, I think it deserves so much better, which is why I would love to see it get a new Mega Evolution. And we're not done with Gen 5 yet, as there's one Pokemon with a very ride or die fanbase that I respect a lot. I don't know if it's just the interactions I've seen, but Golurk isn't a Pokemon that comes up often when people bring up their favorite Pokemon. But the people that do love Golurk really love Golurk. And I'll admit, they kinda sold me on this one. When I first played through Black and White, I didn't really care about this thing. But the whole stick it has of turning itself into a rocket launcher and sometimes even a cannon is kind of sick. And this came from the generation that all the Poke Boomers despised when it came to new Pokemon designs. But you cannot sit here and tell me that this giant rock with arms is the cooler Golem. The lore behind Golurk is pretty interesting as well. Being made by humans in ancient times to protect both people and Pokemon is something that could fit really well in a Legends game. Now the odds of them giving attention to Golurk is super low, as it hasn't really gotten anything over previous generations either. But at the same time, you have to realize that they gave a Mega Evolution to Audino of all Pokemon, who you could argue is even less popular than Golurk. And it doesn't really help that this game clearly takes place in the future. But maybe they could use that to their advantage in some way. Regardless, I would just love to see Golurk win for once, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. But now this is the part of the video where I say if you're enjoying it so far, please let me know by leaving a like. And if you're really liking the vid, I'd appreciate it if you subbed as well. It just lets me know that I'm doing a good job, and it would mean a lot. Up next, I want to talk about a Pokemon that I feel has been a bit robbed compared to the other mythicals from its generation. Pokemon X and Y didn't come out with a lot of them, but it always felt like that Volcanion got the short end of the stick. If you think about it, Diancie holds the title of being the only Gen 6 Pokemon with a Mega Evolution, and Hoopa has this sick and crazy transformation that was responsible for one of the wildest plots I've ever seen in a Pokemon movie. And do you know what Volcanion got? Arguably one of the worst TCG sets of all time. I'm not sure if there's even anything else to say about this one. I don't even like Volcanion that much compared to the other two, but maybe that would change if they gave it the awesome treatment that they gave the other two mythicals. Also, if we're assuming that Xerneas and Yveltal are getting some sort of new form like how Dialga and Palkia did, that would leave Volcanion as the only legendary or mythical Pokemon from X and Y without a super cool transformation. So hey, let's just hope that Volcanion doesn't get shafted again. If you couldn't tell by now, I'm definitely somebody that loves seeing overlooked Pokemon in the spotlight. But unfortunately, a lot of my favorite Pokemon just so happens to be the funny guys. And besides maybe Sableye, I don't think we have any of those types of Mega Evolutions. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to propose Mega Cramorant. Okay, seriously, I know almost nobody cares for this thing, but he's just so goofy and fun, so I'm really sad that he never caught on with people. Cramorant is what we call a gimmick Pokemon, as in they have something unique about them that they rely on to stand out from other Pokemon. In this case, it's Cramorant's signature ability, Gulp Missile. How it works is that upon using Surf or Dive, he will scoop up an Arrokuda in his mouth that he will spit at the opponent upon receiving damage. And hey, if I see any Hawk Tuah jokes in the comments, you're getting banned. He also has like a 25% chance of finding a Pikachu instead, which will also paralyze the opponent on top of just dealing damage. Gimmick Pokemon can sometimes work, but most of the time it just ends up flopping in their face. Cramorant's gimmick wasn't bad, but it was also nothing fantastic either, especially considering it did not have much else going for it. So just like the case of a lot of Pokemon, it faded into irrelevancy, unless you play Pokemon Unite, which at the time of recording, he actually also doesn't do anything there either. Personally, I'm a big fan of the bird, but even if it's not him, I would just love to see more attention to the Pokemon that were meant to be silly. Up next, we have our obligatory Gen 4 slot, since I've included Pokemon from every gen before X and Y besides Diamond and Pearl. It's just weird because they already got a ton of Pokemon that you would expect to get a Mega form. I already brought up Luxray in my previous video, and the whole Sneasel line already got some love in the previous Legends game. So outside of these two, the Gen 4 Pokemon most likely to get a Mega in my opinion is Staraptor. Staraptor is one of the most popular native bird Pokemon that they've ever come out with. There was a lot of reasoning behind this, whether it was how cool it was or just how great it was in your Diamond and Pearl playthrough. Staraptor overall was an insane carry in a lot of important battles, especially if you didn't choose Infernape. And these two Pokemon could probably solo the entire game on their own. Nowadays, Staraptor is still pretty fine, but it has sadly taken up the role of being a suicide bomber. You're either exploding after a few Brave Birds or Double Edges, or outright dying with final Gambit. Well, it's either that or you're dropping your defenses anyways after clicking close combat. Now, this would be a good time to bring up a mega form that I think had a really good design, and that is Pidgeot. Pidgeot in general was a pretty bad Pokemon, and I don't think I need to tell you that. But it did have one niche thanks to it having Hurricane, which it used more than the other regional birds, not because its special attack was really good, but also because its attack was just as bad, so you might as well. Then we were blessed with Mega Pidgeot, who really leaned into this gimmick. They dumped a lot of points into special attack while also giving it the ability No Guard, which ensured that not a single Hurricane ever misses again. Now, I think if they did something similar with Staraptor's final Gambit gimmick or something, it could be pretty cool, but I'm not entirely sure what they could do. I just know that a new Mega did great things for Pidgeot during that era, and we could see the same thing happen to Staraptor too. Now, when you look back at the Megas we have already, you might notice that there are a ton of Mega evolutions for Pseudo legendaries, to the point where some people may not even realize that they missed a few. Regardless of who would be the coolest to see, for me personally, I would have to go with Goodra. But considering that she recently got a Hisuian form, we will just default to my second pick in Hydreigon. Hydreigon has had a pretty interesting history. In battle, as you'd expect from a Pseudo legendary, he's not bad at all. It does have its flaws, but Fairy specifically had a big role in pushing it away from the spotlight. If Getsis rolls out with his Hydreigon in 2025, I promise you that it would be way easier considering that it dies to a Draining Kiss from Flabebe. But I'm digressing from the more important aspect of Hydreigon, and it's just the fact that he's so freaking cool. There are so many ways that they could take this thing's Mega evolution. Hydreigon is heavily inspired by the mythical creature Hydra, who is depicted in Greek mythology to have 9 heads. Albeit in some legends, that number tends to change quite a bit. They could have his Mega look something closer to the original creature, or even go their own route and develop on what they already have. Regardless, it should be really hard to screw up, and it could be something they do to help please the Gen 5 gamers that didn't really get anything from this generation. This is also why I've been going pretty hard with Gen 5 Pokemon. I think this is like the 3rd Gen 5 Pokemon on this list, but hey, don't worry, it's the last one. I also know I didn't bring up Dragonite at all, but in all honesty, I just can't help but feel like he's gonna get one regardless. It's a weird hunch, and you guys could come back and make fun of me whenever we get the game and it doesn't happen. Now, one thing that's super interesting to think about is how Game Freak is gonna implement Pokemon that came after Gen 6 into this game. In Legends Arceus, the Pokedex mainly consisted of the first 4 generations of Pokemon, with a few extra from later gens that got cool new Hisuian forms and evolutions. So it's safe to say that this will probably be the case with Legends ZA as well. And if they don't just get new Kalos forms or something, I think they will also get new Mega evolutions. I already explored this a little bit with my inclusion of Cramorant, but with Scarlet and Violet being the newest games, I feel like there are a ton of contenders for Pokemon that should get Mega evolutions. And look, if I go with Maushold here, I know what the comments are gonna look like, so we'll just call it an honorary mention. Instead, we'll be looking at Tinkaton today. Tinkaton is one of the most iconic Pokemon from Paldea that would make a great representative of Gen 9. And I'll be completely honest here, I would love if it got a Mega, but I'd just be happy if it was in the game at all. I mean, just imagine an angry Alpha Tinkaton chasing you around with a giant hammer. If alphas are even still a thing, which I'm kind of assuming they aren't, but it would still be pretty funny to see. When it comes to the Mega form itself, they could do some crazy things like having it wield 2 hammers or something. Look, if you could not tell by now, I'm not the most creative when it comes to Pokemon design, so it's why I've been avoiding it a little bit. But hey, if you have a better idea, feel free to let me know in the comments below. Those are just 10 out of many Pokemon that I would love to see get a new Mega evolution in Pokemon Legends ZA. It's a pretty niche list for the most part, but that's one of my favorite things about Mega evolution, which is the spotlight that they give to these Pokemon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and have a great rest of your day. And if you're not done watching, then hey, YouTube says that you might like this next video, so let me know if they're right.